In the aftermath of a summer of war, millions of soldiers are digging in along a trackless trench network that stretches almost 500 miles from the North Sea to the Swiss border. And so we pause here to bring you the second episode in our series recounting the most cataclysmic war in human history. Welcome to our channel. It's the beginning of November 1914. The opening phase of the war has seen enormous armies clash in great sweeping maneuvers across Europe. But in just a few weeks, these have become locked in place, facing off across hundreds of miles of newly established battlefields. Fighting continues on the Eastern Front, but the main event is the Western Front, where France and Germany face off. After 4 months of war, the military situation seems stalemated. The Allies are unable to dislodge the Germans from the trenches they dug along the French-Belgian border, and the Germans are unable to achieve their goal of a swift knockout blow to knock France out of the war. Military leaders on both sides are aware that the war could drag on for years, even decades. And so both sides set about turning their current defensive positions into permanent fortifications. This marks the start of a long and bloody chapter in military history known as the era of trench warfare, which will last until the eventual collapse of the Western Front in late 1980. And nowhere is this trench warfare more extensive than on the Western Front, which contains one of the longest continuous lines of defenses ever built. So what exactly are these trenches like? Well, let's have a look at those on the German side of the front. At the rear of the line are the reserve trenches. These are relatively spacious, with high walls and good ventilation. This was where the bulk of the German troops live out their day-to-day lives. Behind the reserve is a labyrinth of communication trenches that lead to the intermediate trenches, which are similar to the reserve trenches. But closer to the front, the trenches become narrower and deeper, and the conditions become progressively worse. At the very front of the German lines are the stormtrooper trenches, the final link in the chain before no man's land and the opposing trenches of the Allies. From here, German soldiers would launch attacks into no man's land to try and overwhelm the enemy's position. These stormtrooper trenches are usually only occupied by a handful of men at a time, who take turns returning to the relative safety of the reserve trenches at the rear. No man's land is littered with barbed wire entanglements and thousands of feet of trackless railway lines running from the various supply dumps behind the front to the various field kitchens close behind the fighting trenches. To feed the soldiers on the front line, a constant stream of supplies passes along these railways, bringing ammunition, weapons, and above all, food. It's a similar story on the French side of the Western Front, where they have constructed equally impressive lines of defense. As the stalemate drags on, the French and British begin investing heavily in technology to break the deadlock. By November, the British had deployed anti-tank weaponry in the form of camouflage stakes designed to pierce the underbellies of German tanks. But such primitive anti-tank measures were yet to be employed on the Western Front. For now, life in the trenches was monotonous, though punctuated by sudden bursts of intense violence. During these, the soldiers were exposed to artillery fire, snipers, and deadly poison gas. As the Western Front stabilizes, military leaders formulate plans to break through the enemy's lines and win the war. But such offensives require months of preparation. And so for now, the months between November 1914 and April 1915 pass quietly along the Western Front, though it is anything but quiet elsewhere. In January, Austrian troops are routed at Karansebes, forcing the Germans to intervene and relieve the situation. At the Battle of Karansebes, the Austrians suffered 25,000 casualties, including 10,000 captured by the Russians. Along the Eastern Front, the Russians push the Austrians out of Romanian territory, but fail to secure any further victories, and both sides settle into a new stalemate. Soon after, the Austrians and Germans conduct a joint offensive against the Russians in Galicia, hoping to repeat their earlier success at Tannenberg, but the Russians manage to hold their ground. The British are enjoying greater success in their war against the Ottomans in the Middle East. In January, they capture Baghdad and press on to the Ottoman capital of Constantinople. But British hopes for rapid Ottoman collapse are quickly dashed as Turkish forces rallied to the defense of their capital. After 10 months of fighting, the war has become a real struggle of attrition. Each side is committed to total victory, so they pour men and resources into the fight. By the end of 1914, the Germans had 650,000 men fighting on the Eastern Front, with another 500,000 on the Western Front. The British have over 500,000 men in France and Belgium alone, with 30,000 of them Australian and New Zealanders. Across the Western Front, millions of rounds of artillery are fired daily, shaking the ground and sending shells screaming through the air. The British and French begin 1915 in a state of low morale. Over 700,000 of them have been killed and countless others wounded. But the new French president, Raymond, promises that 1915 will be the year of victory. The German Kaiser, William II, feels equally confident of victory. His chancellor, Theobald von Bethmann-Hollweg, believes that the British will sue for peace within a few months and that the Germans will emerge victorious in the East. The Kaiser also expects a quick victory over the Russians. And in February, the Germans commit their first major strategic blunder of the war. On February, German troops opened fire on a group of unarmed and unsuspecting Russian prisoners, executing 60 of them and leaving 27 wounded to die slowly of exposure. The incident sparks an immediate diplomatic crisis. With its latest round of peace feelers rebuffed by the British, the Russian public demands retribution. The Germans are forced to offer an apology and agree to pay an indemnity, but refuse to admit any wrongdoing. Nevertheless, the incident causes deep rifts within the Germans' inner circle. Chancellor Bethmann-Hollweg resents the Kaiser's warmongering nature, while the influential General von Moltke sees little purpose in continuing the war. Nevertheless, the war continues and the Germans prepare to unleash their ultimate weapon against the Allies, poison gas. The first large-scale use of chemical weapons in warfare. In April, the Germans release 170 tons of chlorine gas against the French in the Second Battle of Ypres. The French, unprepared for such a weapon, panic and fall back, allowing the Germans to take the town and advance another 4 miles beyond it. With a mere 12,000 men, they achieved a breakthrough of over 10 miles, causing consternation among the Allies. Within days, the British and French are reinforced, however, and the Germans are forced to settle into another defensive position, the second of many, to dot the Western Front. The French respond to the German gas attack by developing their own gas bombs. In August, the Allies launch a major offensive, the Battle of the Somme, aimed at breaking the deadlock on the Western Front. Over the course of the next 5 months, 600,000 British and 200,000 French troops are involved in the fighting, with 420,000 of them casualties. While the British take 15 miles of trenches, the French take none at all. That winter, British troops celebrate Christmas by playing football matches in no man's land. A Canadian medical officer, John Weir, writes of such an event, saying, and I quote, "It was the best game of football I ever saw. All through the morning, shells were falling in the vicinity, and at times the players would scatter and dive for cover. When a shell landed too close, the game would stop. And when it started again, there was always a new player in the game, for soldiers from the trenches came out to watch." He ends his description of the match with these words: "There were no spectators, no betting bookies, no gate money taken, but every man who saw the game felt that he had paid his admission fee by being compelled to endure an afternoon of perfect happiness." While the Western Front continues to chew up men and resources, the rest of the world grinds to a halt. As the war of position solidifies, most of the action in the war takes place on minor colonial fronts, but there is one notable exception: the Gallipoli Campaign. In April 1915, British and French troops land in Turkey with the goal of capturing the strategically vital Ottoman capital of Istanbul, and so opening a supply route to Russia. But poor planning and organization mean that the Allied landing is a